Hello, my name is Mark Rich. In this documentary, I'll be reporting on a vital issue that impacts the survival of all people, a topic that has received little attention from independent and official institutions. I've determined that our life-sustaining natural resources are under formidable attack by an international organized crime network composed of European royalty, central banking families, and other substantially wealthy people. This cabal is using natural resource development projects to hide ecological warfare campaigns. Industrial infrastructure all over the world has been converted into compound weapons systems. A dual strategy for soft kill and area denial has been very effectively employed. Toxic industrial materials serve as improvised weapons of mass destruction to contaminate a targeted zone, while industrial equipment is used as covert, non-lethal weapons to induce recurrent psychological trauma. This clandestine war form uses unconventional methods to inflict devastating effects, spanning the ecological, psychological, economical, cultural, social, and biological realms. These state and corporate-hosted attacks are causing respiratory, cardiovascular, and central nervous system disorders, in addition to reproductive problems and DNA damage. Food and water reserves are being systematically pruned globally. It appears these offenses, along with stratospheric aerosol injection, arson, radiation, and other forms of ecocide, are part of a scheme to disintegrate Earth's biosphere. Unfortunately, many of the elected officials who ostensibly govern the nations that host their attacks are on board with the ecocidal plan. This agenda of planetary sabotage that's intertwined with a comprehensive depopulation program is already in an advanced stage. Due to the overwhelming injury that the planet has sustained and their evident resolve to swiftly contaminate our remaining natural provisions, this issue is both critical and urgent. I suspected that some environmental disasters were staged and found independent and standard media reports confirming that crude oil had been weaponized. When I started learning about this subject, I was already familiar with a type of hidden, unconventional warfare conducted by a civil-military interagency that uses regular citizens as proxy forces. I noticed that these two vague war forms had some of the same attributes. A prominent mutual feature is the conversion of infrastructure common to civilian settings into compound weapons systems that would be overlooked by most people. Continuing my study, I picked up additional clues. I discovered that the construction and operation of certain industrial projects had been frequently weaponized. Eventually, I started to detect this pattern in many industrial disasters. It was then obvious to me that they had been at this for a long time, and that a large number of people were under attack. I realized that in addition to depopulation, these ecological strikes were part of the plan to subvert Earth's life support systems. As I collected more evidence, a clandestine invasion archetype transpired. My goal in this documentary, that contains 22 chapters, is to give you an overview of what I've learned. I'll mention some of the corporations that I think are being used to wage ecological warfare against civilians. I intend to show you that extractive infrastructure is being used to disperse covert, non-lethal weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Some of the clues that I use to decipher arranged catastrophes will be presented so that you will be able to notice impending attacks and ones that have already occurred when observing media reports. I'll also explain how the ecocidal mass murderers are being protected by regulators, politicians, and federal agencies. Rather than covering specific attacks in detail, I've decided to give you an outline of this situation because I think that will be a more valuable use of time. To do that, I needed to include multiple pieces of the puzzle, each with enough information, so that hopefully, at the end of this presentation, you will have a good idea of the situation as I see it. The course of this documentary will go like this. After this introduction, we'll observe ancient ecological warfare to see that much of what's happening now has already occurred in the past. In the Modern Ecological Warfare chapter, we'll see how federal agencies and defense departments in several countries recognize industrial components as potential weapons of mass destruction. The use of crude oil as a weapon of mass destruction in recent history will also be explored. In Chapter 4, we'll have a look at a hypothesized contemporary state and corporate hosted clandestine ecological warfare blueprint. In Chapter 5, I'll give you my opinion on the levels of complicity, how AI-enabled C4ISR is probably the central nervous system of the attacks, and how military and federal agencies are likely responsible for the campaigns on the operational level. After that, we'll get a glimpse of how the New World Order has been established, extensive political bribery, and how the prominent elected officials who serve the ecocidal maniacs are merely following orders to allow these attacks. Evidence will be provided in Chapter 7 to show that governments are in league with and providing cover for this international crime network that is using industrial infrastructure for a worldwide area denial and depopulation program. Some clues that I use to decipher planned disasters will be revealed in the Clandestine Ecological Attack Patterns chapter. Bernie munitions for the strategy of global area and resource denial will be the subject of Chapter 9. The next 5 videos Chapters 10 through 14 will be on what I've noticed in regard to the decoys used to hide the invasions, the employment of industrial infrastructure as non-lethal weapons for psychological attack, and the use of toxic industrial materials as alternate CBRNE agents to sicken people and contaminate food and water provisions. The Administrators of Earth's Destruction chapter will be about the financial institutions and specific families who control the banks and ecological warfare apparatus. In Chapter 16, we'll explore some ecocide machines that are being used to dismantle Earth's biosphere. We'll briefly examine the topic of psychopathy in the Profile of Earth-Hating Psychopaths chapter to see that people exist with foreign, base-level coding that causes them to think differently and partake in activities that most decent people would consider deplorable. Chapter 18 will include theories on what these moneyed psychopaths have to gain by destroying Earth's ecosystems, and how they could carry out such a task as residents of this planet. Then we'll get a glimpse of some of their other crimes to see that their planned destruction of our life support system is only one of their atrocities. In Chapter 20, we'll observe how the Department of Justice and Environmental Protection Agency are actively shielding the criminals, and have a look at some other organizations that may be cooperating in the cover-up of this program. After that, we'll see how the host nation's police and military are on site during installation and operation of the weapons systems, protecting the criminals and ensuring that the weapons systems are installed and safeguarded. In the final video, we'll have a quick review. The suggestions offered will be expanded on in the notes of that video. Most chapters will be accompanied by a directory containing supporting data, and some with a notes PDF for details.